Hey, everybody. It is Wednesday, September 25th. You're listening to the Mo.news podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Jill, I'm told by the internet today that today, September 25th, is National Daughter Day.
Moshe, I'm giggling because we just got into a fight before this podcast started about National Daughter Day and whether or not we were going to post photos or how we were going to celebrate it.
Yeah, it's like one of those fake Instagram holidays. Some people post pictures of their kids, some people don't. Jill sort of gave me an eye roll about it. I'm like, you have a daughter, I have a daughter. We can all celebrate National Daughter Day how we want to, Jill.
And Moshe, I am a daughter, so we'll see if my mom, who I know listens to this podcast religiously, decides to celebrate me on social media.
I'm sure Carol has big plans on the Instagram today.
I know what she's going to do. It's what she always does. She pulls up a picture of me as a little kid and says, "You'll always be my little girl." And it's very sweet.
Okay. Well, I'm glad it's very sweet. Carol, we love that post. And if you do that post again this year, we're good with it. By the way, for those of you outside the U.S., apparently World Daughter Day is in a couple days from now on the 28th. So everyone will have a chance to be celebrated as a daughter and celebrate their daughters in the way that they choose. Hashtag National Daughter Day, Jill. That's
kind of insane, though, that the PR people just couldn't get it together to give us a global made-up holiday.
Right. Well, I mean, Mother's Day also is in different times, different days in different countries. You know, you can't get the world to agree on anything, Jill. We're going to talk about the UN here in a little bit on the podcast. Maybe we should start with like holidays celebrating daughters, see if we can get agreement on that, and then we'll work on world peace.
All right, let's get to the headlines. Big Pharma goes to Washington. The battle over lowering prices for Ozempic and other blockbuster weight loss drugs. Moshe, here in the U.S., not as simple as it may seem.
Is anything simple? There's the insurance companies, the pharmacies, the drug companies, us, and we'll learn more today about pharmacy benefit managers, Jill, the fifth prong in the Pentagon of prescription drug prices.
President Biden gives his farewell address at the UN General Assembly, his message to world leaders. In the Middle East, there's some reporting that Hezbollah is asking for an assist from Iran to directly attack Israel, what Iran's reportedly telling Hezbollah. Not gonna happen.
You guys are on your own for a bit.
Back here in the U.S., Florida facing a major hurricane threat, the projected path of Helene. In business news, the DOJ is suing Visa for monopolizing the debit card market. And Brett Favre reveals that he has Parkinson's, what we know about his diagnosis. Plus, in lighter news, what is Fridgescaping and is it safe?
Today I learned that people Fridgescape, Jill.
Moshe, something I learned as well. I feel like your Alex could kind of get on the trend, like a light version of it, maybe.
I don't know. We'll have to ask her after she listens to the segment.
Yeah. And Moshe is on this day in history.
Jill, I will say your clue today is this was probably one of the most revolutionary things to come to your car in the past 50 years.
Consider me stumped.
People will have different opinions here, but I can't imagine life without it.
I know it's not a cassette player, right? It can't be the music player. I'm thinking 50 years ago. Let's start with a big hearing on Capitol Hill with senators pressing the CEO of the pharma company Novo Nordisk, which makes popular diabetes and weight loss drugs Ozempic and Wegovy. So lawmakers want to know why these medicines cost so much less abroad, or more to the point, why they are so expensive here in the United States. And Moshe, I'll start with some of the numbers. A Department of Health and Human Services report in February found that in 2022, prices of all drugs in the U.S., both brand name and generic, were nearly 3 times as high as in wealthy countries. Now on to these weight loss drugs. The cost of Wegovy significantly less in European countries. We're talking $140 a month in Germany, to just $92 a month in the UK, and compare that to the $1,349 a month price tag that some Americans are paying for the exact same drug. On Tuesday, tense exchanges at the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. At one point, Senator Bernie Sanders, who chairs the committee, simply asking Novo Nordisk CEO Lars Jorgensen to stop ripping Americans off. Here is part of that exchange.
All we are saying, Mr. Jorgensen, is treat the American people the same way that you treat people all over the world. Stop ripping us off.
But Moshe, it isn't as simple as it sounds. Jorgensen shifting the blame for the drug's high prices to the pharmacy benefits managers, or the PBMs, saying that Ozempic and Wegovy would no longer be offered by the middlemen if they had a lower list price. So in case you're not familiar, a pharmacy benefit manager, or again, a PBM, is a company that acts as an intermediary between a health insurance company and a pharmacy to manage prescription drug benefits. PBMs technically work for the health insurance companies to negotiate discounts on drugs, and they are one of the few parts of the prescription drug supply chain. They have been criticized for pushing patients to higher priced drugs. Those companies would argue that they're actually saving Americans money. Jorgensen claims that for every dollar Novo Nordisk makes, it gives 74 cents of that to PBMs and insurance companies. So he said, when we set a list price, we've got to take into consideration what are the rebates we have to pay, because unless we pay big rebates into the system, when we negotiate rebates with PBMs, we are not getting access to the formulary. So he said, when we set a list price, we have to take into consideration what are the rebates that we have to pay. And he said that if they don't pay the high rebates, that the companies may not cover the drug. So in other words, the higher prices actually ensure that a PBM will cover Novo Nordisk's drugs.
All right, so just to recap here, 5 players. There's all of us, the consumers. There are the insurance companies. There is the pharmacy. There's the manufacturer of the drugs like Novo Nordisk and Pfizer, et cetera. And then the PBM. So 5 different players here. You, the consumer, pay for your insurance, right? You pay for the drug, whatever it is, whatever the price ends up being at the pharmacy. But that's only after this very complicated, effectively 4-way negotiation between the drug manufacturers, the insurance company outsourcing to the pharmacy benefit managers, and then the pharmacies themselves. Welcome to America, where nothing is easy. So the insurance companies here effectively employing these PBMs to do their negotiating on their behalf, get the better rates, be talking to the manufacturers, be talking to the pharmacies, and figure out the deal here. So you have Jorgensen and these other CEOs saying that simply by lowering the list price, you're not necessarily going to save people money, because the pharmacy benefit managers, again, the middlemen here in between the insurance companies and everybody else, allegedly curb access to drugs with lower list prices because they make less money on them. No, that's something we've heard from other folks, including the Federal Trade Commission, which last week said that as it sued 3 of these larger pharmacy benefit managers. So the prices here, despite the fact that when you look at the list prices for something like Ozempic, where it's 8 to 9 times more expensive here in the US for the same drug as it is in other countries, or Wegovy, which is 10 to 12 times more expensive here in the US than it is in other countries, you can't blame it on them, they say, because you have these pharmacy benefit managers. So you had Bernie Sanders yesterday saying that he recently received commitments in writing from all the major pharmacy benefit managers. That includes United Health Group, Optum Rx. That includes CVS Health's Caremark and Cigna's Express Scripts. And Sanders says that if Novo Nordisk reduces their price, that these PBMs will not take them off the list of drugs that they offer. So Sanders put him on the spot yesterday saying, listen, I got a commitment here from these pharmacy benefit managers. Will you now lower the list price here in the US for drugs like Ozempic? Jorgensen initially said that he needed to understand more about what that entails, but that yes, he would work to lower prices. Sanders says this is a serious thing. This is literally life and death, not just for people who use these drugs for things like diabetes, but for other drugs across the country. Because of the price, it's estimated that hundreds of thousands of Americans who desperately need various drugs like this are not able to afford them. Now, We should add the price of Ozempic and Wegovy have dropped over the last couple of years. Ozempic, for instance, has gone down 40% here in the U.S. since it was first introduced. Senator Tim Kaine, he's also a Democrat. He's from Virginia. Now, Senator Tim Kaine, Democrat from Virginia, also took aim at the PBMs here, less ire, less wrath, like Bernie at the pharmaceutical companies, and said, yeah, the PBMs here are getting away scot-free. He noted that one industry researches, one doesn't, one produces life-saving treatment, one doesn't. So now it appears for some of these leaders on Capitol Hill, their attention will turn to the pharmacy benefit managers and how that dynamic works. As I mentioned, the Federal Trade Commission here has popped in, accusing Optum Rx, Caremark, et cetera, of artificially inflating the price of a number of drugs, including insulin. And that's a lot of what you're hearing from the Democrats in particular on Capitol Hill. You also had Republicans on the committee yesterday saying they shouldn't be pressuring pharma companies to lower the prices of drugs, that lowering the prices here means less money for these pharma companies to develop new life-saving medications. That's an argument you hear from the drug manufacturers, which is we need this money because it's really expensive to do the R&D to develop the newer drugs. Here you had Senator Bill Cassidy, he's a Republican from Louisiana, who said that without a profit motive, without something in return, it's unclear that these drugs or any drug is going to be developed. So just to give you some food for thought here, as you think about the dynamic and all the various factors, the five players here, as well as the various debate that you hear from Democrats and Republicans as to the incentive structure for these pharma companies and what it means for the development of the next generation of drugs.
All right, now let's talk about the United Nations, where President Biden gave his farewell address to the UN General Assembly on Tuesday. He spent a big portion of his career focused on foreign policy. Biden tried to stay optimistic, but acknowledged the devastating wars in Ukraine, the Middle East, and Sudan that will likely outlast his presidency.
I know many look at the world today and see difficulties and react with despair, but I do not. I won't. As leaders, we don't have the luxury. I recognize the challenges from Ukraine to Gaza to Sudan and beyond. War, hunger, terrorism, brutality, record displacement of people, a climate crisis, democracy at risk, strains within our societies, the promise of artificial intelligence and its significant risk. The list goes on. But maybe because all I've seen and all we have done together over the decades, I have hope.
On Ukraine, Biden claimed that the alliances that he rebuilt and global cooperation that he's helped to lead has prevented Vladimir Putin from overrunning Ukraine, and he's urging fellow leaders not to look away. When it comes to the Middle East, he said he is still pushing for a ceasefire and hostage deal, saying, quote, now is the time for the parties to finalize the terms, bring the hostages home, secure security for Israel and Gaza free of Hamas's grip, ease the suffering in Gaza, and end this war. But senior U.S. officials, as we've been talking about, have acknowledged privately that a ceasefire in Gaza is unlikely, at least during Biden's term, saying that neither side appears to truly want a deal.
It was an interesting message, hearing him give his last speech there. He went back to his time in his 20s when he first entered government and talked about his career over the course of the past half century and said that, they've seen a lot of things. Remember, Biden got into the Senate while the war in Vietnam was still taking place. And he acknowledged that there's been a lot of challenges in the world and leaders have to get together, that all of these issues that the world is facing, like global threats to climate change and all these individual conflicts, are solvable if people can work together. Also notable, Jill, and it got some interesting reaction in the room, was how he ended his speech, reflecting on his career and his decision this summer not to run for re-election. He told the world body some things are more important than staying in power. Jill, based on my last look at things, 45% of the room, 45% of the countries there, just about 90 of them are effectively autocracies, whether they have fake elections or no elections at all. So as he talked to that room, where nearly half the country's in there, he's saying something like something is more important than staying in power, literally half the room, that is the most important thing to them, is staying in power. So you did see a smattering of applause there among the democracies in the world. And that's just something to reinforce to folks, especially as we talk about, and we brought up your question yesterday to the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas Greenfield, about the need for UN reform, is that the world is effectively split these days between half democracies and half autocracies. And so that makes a body like the UN pretty challenging, because there are very different interests between countries that are democracies and countries where power and ultimate power and lifetime power is the most important thing. Speaking of autocracies, one region where nearly every country is an autocracy, the Middle East, save for the democracy in Israel. We're watching developments there in the region between Hezbollah and Israel. Israel looking to continue to take out major Hezbollah terrorist infrastructure in Lebanon. The Israelis saying that Hezbollah was planning their own version of October 7th. And a reminder that Hezbollah has more well-trained forces, has 20 times the missiles, a much more advanced military force than Hamas has ever had. So Israel's been focused here on preemption and taking out Hezbollah before they can launch their own version of an invasion like Hamas did back last October 7th. They've taken out several thousand targets over the last couple of weeks. It's unclear how many of the missiles and weaponry they've taken out, but just prior to this, Hezbollah had an estimated 150 to 200,000 missiles. That compares to Hamas, which had about 15,000 going into their war. Today, it looks like Hezbollah has lost a quarter to a third of its missiles over the last couple of weeks. Hamas has a couple thousand left. But just to give you a sense of just the scale of Hezbollah, so Israel's been targeting there after taking incoming from Hezbollah thousands of rockets over the last year or so, displacing a whole number of Israelis. And so Lebanon right now, watching this all unfold. Many Lebanese, I spoke to a friend of mine there who worked in the Lebanese government and is always able to give me a very honest take on what's happening there, especially as Hezbollah has gradually infiltrated the government there. And I just wanted to check on him. And he said that he is not evacuating, even though he lives in the southern half of the country, that the Israelis have been very precise in their targeting, and he knows he doesn't live near any sort of Hezbollah stronghold. So he's staying there with his kids. And you know if you live in a Hezbollah stronghold or not. He noted that Hezbollah is not in a great place right now, that a lot of the middle management, he called it, of Hezbollah was taken out by those pager and walkie-talkie bombs last week. So it's a state of chaos right now for Hezbollah, and they're not really prepared to go to war right now, especially with their communications infrastructure down. A lot of their leaders have been taken out over the course of the past few weeks by the Israelis. And it comes as there's some additional reporting we're getting from Barak Ravid over at Axios, who says that Hezbollah apparently asked Iran in recent days to launch an attack against Israel to support them as they're taking all this incoming. Iran says, we're not getting involved right now. Our president is in New York addressing the UN. We have other matters. The timing isn't right, apparently, was the quote from the Iranians to Hezbollah. And we should note who supports Hezbollah, who created Hezbollah, who arms Hezbollah, who funds them. It is Iran. So they called, headquarters and said, hey, we need some support here. And Iran's like, you're on your own for now.
Yeah, they called in the big guns, and the big guns were like, yeah, it's not going to happen.
No, they're like, good luck taking what you're going to take. Now, it also, we should note, Jill, Iran's been promising revenge for the killing of the Hamas leader at the presidential inauguration in Tehran earlier this summer, and Iran still hasn't done its, quote, revenge for that yet. And so a lot of people have been looking at that, wondering what's happening with Iran, what's their strategy here, as we tell you every day on the podcast. None of these countries want a regional war. It doesn't actually serve any of their interests right now, but escalation every day, fighting every day tends to escalate things, even if it goes against your interests. And that's a concern the Americans have here. One person in the government told me that, the Israelis are trying to de-escalate through escalation. And so there are some American officials who don't know that that is the best strategy here. The Israelis, again, say they can't wait around and allow another October 7th to happen to them, conducted by a group in Hezbollah, which is better trained, much larger, etc.
One Israeli analyst, I thought, put it pretty well. He said one of the biggest failures, perhaps the biggest failure in Israel's history, is the lack of preparation in terms of the attack that Hamas had on October 7th. So the attack by Hamas in the south of the country. But on the other hand, they have spent the past 15 years, more than that, since 2006, preparing to go to war against Hezbollah and collecting intelligence against Hezbollah. So you could see the difference in the way that Israel is conducting its attacks on Beirut with the pager attacks and everything else, and how different that is in terms of the intelligence that they have on Hezbollah versus the intelligence they have on Hamas.
Yeah, it comes as, they view Hezbollah as a much more existential threat to the country. And so it appears at least a lot of the resources have been focused up north and not down south in Gaza.
Time for the speed read from NBC News. A hurricane watch and warnings of storm surges up to 15 feet high were issued Tuesday for almost all of Florida's western coastline as Tropical Storm Helene formed over the Caribbean Sea and heads towards the Gulf Coast. Helene, which was previously called Potential Tropical Cyclone 9, officially formed Tuesday, and the storm has been strengthening into a hurricane. The hurricane watch extends from Indian Pass in the northwest of Florida near Panama City down to Englewood. It also includes Tampa Bay. If the storm upgrades further, it will be the fourth hurricane to hit the United States this year. The center of the storm is forecast to move across the northwestern Caribbean Sea and over the eastern Gulf of Mexico today and tomorrow, according to the National Hurricane Center, and could potentially reach the Gulf Coast of Florida and make landfall late Thursday. Helene could become a major hurricane, meaning a Category 3 with 110 to 130 mile per hour winds or stronger by then.
Yeah, and if it got to major hurricane status, it would be the 9th to hit the Gulf Coast since 2017, so in just 7 years there. And this could become a pretty large storm. You could feel the effects here between southeast Florida, we're talking kind of down to Naples, all the way to Alabama, Mississippi border there. And you could see some major flooding in Georgia as well. I warn you, if you listen to us in Atlanta, that Friday could be a rough day for you guys, depending on the state of the storm, how quickly it's moving, and what's left of it. Hurricane and tropical storm watches are now in effect for the entire west coast of Florida. In the southeastern U.S., it's forecast to bring 3 to 6 inches, but isolated totals could hit upwards of a foot there. Flash flooding, urban flooding. So just a heads up, Florida has already declared a state of emergency in the majority of its counties as it prepares here. This is nothing new for Florida. Again, much of the focus right now is on the Big Bend and Panhandle area, but it could make moves to the left or to the right, especially over the course of the next 36 hours here. And landfall, again, expected sometime in the afternoon or evening hours tomorrow.
From Axios, the U.S. Justice Department on Tuesday sued Visa for allegedly monopolizing the debit card market, which has led to higher prices. Debit cards are America's most prevalent payment method, used more than twice as much as credit cards. This case could result in the market being opened up for more players, depending on what kind of remedy the DOJ seeks here. The DOJ alleging that Visa controls over 60% of debit transactions, helping it earn over $7 billion in fees each year. Using that ubiquity as leverage, the DOJ claims that Visa effectively forces merchants to send almost all of their payments through its network by imposing large disloyalty penalties if they should fail to hit certain volumes. So that discourages the use of cheaper and smaller competitors.
Visa also, according to the allegations here, kneecapped the ambitions of tech rivals like Apple and PayPal by entering into agreements for the secret purpose of slowing or stopping their development. They apparently have some quotes here, the Justice Department does, from Visa executives that concern them here as they pursued this case. The DOJ saying in a press release that Visa's systemic efforts to limit competition for debit transactions have resulted in billions of dollars of additional fees imposed on American consumers and businesses. As far as Visa is concerned, they say the lawsuit is meritless and they will defend themselves vigorously. What's next? The Justice Department here is asking that Visa be blocked from using pricing and contracts that discourage the use of a competitor. It's also asking that Visa no longer be allowed to mention its rivals explicitly or implicitly in contracts. The DOJ here has been watching Visa for a while. A couple of years ago, it blocked its $5 billion acquisition of Plaid. That was a startup whose technology threatened to eat into its cards business. The deal fell apart a couple of months later, but Visa ended up buying a European company that it was concerned about potentially competing with at some point. And this all comes as Capital One has tried to buy Discover here. So a lot happening in the credit card industry. And as we've mentioned in a number of sectors, whether it's the grocery sector and others, the federal government says that they're taking a much more aggressive stance when it comes to protecting the consumer here.
From NBC News, Hall of Fame quarterback Brett Favre disclosed during a congressional hearing on Tuesday that he was recently diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, a degenerative nervous system disorder that causes parts of the brain to deteriorate and affects movement. Speaking before the House Ways and Means Committee, Favre, who is 54 years old, spoke about Prevacus, a company making a concussion drug that received $2 million of temporary assistance for needy families, or TAMF funds. Favre was the top investor in the company and helped to try to get them funding. Here's a little bit of his testimony.
And I'm sure you'll understand why it's too late for me, because I've recently been diagnosed with Parkinson's. This is also a cause dear to my heart.
So this company that Favre worked with has been facing a lot of issues. The company founder pleaded guilty to wire fraud over the summer, admitting that he used Mississippi welfare money to pay off gambling and other debts. And Favre has been implicated in all of this, despite framing himself yesterday in testimony as a victim and making a point, and I found this interesting, of revealing his Parkinson's disease while he was facing testimony here that was set to be very critical, and he was going to get hard questions here about the use of tens of millions of dollars in money that had been earmarked for poor families that were instead diverted to rich and powerful people like himself. Favre is one of dozens of defendants in a lawsuit seeking to recoup the misappropriated funds that went to this company. Favre made more than $1 million off these funds. He says he knew nothing about this. He's denied any wrongdoing. And so he was talking about his own investment in a company related to Parkinson's disease. And that certainly has taken a lot of the focus of the past. And that certainly has become the focus of many of the headlines related to him in the past 24 hours here. Jill, one of the things about Favre is he was known to never miss a game in his 20-year NFL career. There's only been a handful of official concussions. He actually thinks he may have suffered thousands of concussions over his couple decades playing football.
And Moshe, now to a trend story from the Washington Post. Fridgescaping, making the inside of your refrigerator worthy of a star spot on your Instagram or TikTok feed, has been all over social media lately. It includes the obligatory color-coordinated items stored in cleared containers and condiments and beverages lined up in neat rows. But some people are taking it even further. Think vases of flowers, fresh fruit in decorative bowls, even framed photos perched on refrigerator shelves. So this is taking refrigerator decor and organization to a whole new level. One dietitian saying this is home decor meets home organization. Some even have themes like The Hobbit or Bridgerton. Creative? Yes. But it does raise the question, is it practical? Certainly not. And even safe. And the answer is it depends on how it's done and whom you ask. There are perks of fridgescaping. On the upside, it could lead to cleaner refrigerators if you routinely wipe down the shelves and get rid of dirt, dust, and crumbs. Also, regularly taking inventory and tossing expired items will make it easier to access the foods you want, and a clean, organized fridge could help reduce food waste.
Jill, what's going on here? I know where my fruits and veggies are. I know where my dairy is. I know where we put the leftovers. We have a system, and maybe it's not the most aesthetically pleasing system, but it's organized. It's efficient. It means that things won't spill. Anyway. All the more power to those of you. What were you thinking of making this your project this weekend, trying to fridgescape your fridge?
I barely have enough room in my refrigerator for the food,
right,
let alone vases of flowers. They lost me on the picture frames. That's a bridge too far.
You need to have a massive fridge and eat a lot of takeout, because if you're eating at home a lot, you need to put all the food in there. The purpose of the fridge. Anyway, no insult. I'm sure we have people in this audience who fridgescape, but I'm sure you have lovely fridges, and we'd love to hear from you. So please message us and explain how you do this in a practical way, because just in reading the story, framed photos, they can fall over on the shelves. Why are you risking broken glass in this whole thing? And the thing about the fridge too is you put stuff in there and you're like, oh, these are my leftovers. You want to be efficient. And then, sometimes it's always disappointing to me where I'm like, oh, I totally forgot about that. And now it's gone bad. And now I'm spending extra money on food at a time where we know how expensive food has become. So, there's that. There's also do you want to transfer things to glass that should remain in their own container. You know, there's a purpose, there's a method to the madness, and there's fridge experts out there who will tell you, you know, ways to keep stuff in the fridge that'll preserve them for as long as possible, that may not be the most aesthetically pleasing, but is the most practical way to do it and will save you the most amount of money. The bottom line, Jill, also is like, there's ways to also keep your fridge clean without stacking everything color-coded too. Like, just keep it clean. Like, wipe it down.
Like, I don't understand the themes. Like the Bridgerton theme? What is it?
I have a Bridgerton theme.
For Halloween, I guess, but like for your fridge?
It's just, it's not gonna, I don't know. Listen.
Are we too old? I don't know.
Listen, we promise on this podcast just the facts, but sometimes we have opinions, and this is a story we had an opinion on. Anyway, I hope we haven't lost too many of our listeners. The Fridgescapers, the Fridgescaper convention. Is this even a real trend? Is this a real trend? Or did like 2 people do this? Tell me.
It was in the Washington Post, so I'm going to go
again.
with it.
I don't know. I know great reporters of the Washington Post, and I've seen some questionable reporting in the Washington Post. So we're on it, folks. We're going to stay on the.
If you Fridgescape, send us the picture of your fridge. That's what we want to see.
Because we're not being very nice to them. We're asking lots of questions.
I think that you and I have open minds. Convince us otherwise.
True. Convince us that Fridgescaping is like, that not Fridgescaping is the biggest mistake that we're making right now. If you're a Fridgescaper and you send us a photo and you convince us otherwise, we'll give you a free 1 year of mo.news premium. There you go. Oh. And then we'll print out a mo.news premium logo for you to frame, to put in a picture frame.
In your fridge.
All right, now time for On This Day in History. We begin in 1789. A lot of history, revolutionary history this week. A lot of early U.S. history here. Post-independence this week. We talked about the Supreme Court being created. Also, the first U.S. Congress on this day in 1789 adopted the amendments that became the Bill of Rights. All right, fast forward to the 20th century now. On this day in 1978, some major legal history for female sports reporters. We might take it for granted now, but through the late 70s, female reporters were not allowed in men's locker rooms. So at the time, you had Melissa Lutke. She was a writer for Sports Illustrated. She was denied access to the New York Yankees clubhouse for the 77 World Series. So on this day in 1978, the following year, she filed a suit in U.S. District Court, which she eventually won, allowing female writers into baseball locker rooms after the games. And it's history now. So on this day in 1978, she filed a suit in U.S. District Court, which she eventually won, allowing female writers in baseball locker rooms.
One of my first internships in college was for a local news show, and I had to go into a basketball locker room. I was so short. Like I've never felt shorter in my whole life, and I'm pretty short.
So the height thing was the big thing, because I would say, like, in a men's locker room, they're changing, they're walking around naked. Like, I didn't know where you were going to go with that story, and like I was like, oh, that's all we got with that story. Like, I'm not insulting the story.
Trying to keep it PG.
I was hoping there'd be something slightly, at least PG-13, Jill. All right, keeping with women's history here.
Use your imagination.
There you go.
Next.
On this day in 1981, Sandra Day O'Connor became the first woman to serve on the U.S. Supreme Court. On this day in 2001, this is the answer to the clue. September 25th, 2001, turning 23 years old today, XM satellite radio launched, Jill. I feel like that itself was a revolution for those of us driving around. There was now an opportunity, beyond having your own CDs or tapes at the time, of course, to be able to listen to music, switch between stations, commercial free.
See, I thought you were going with like windshield wiper, something more utilitarian, but you're right. The ability to listen commercial free to music and talk radio, etc.
And without turning the dial, like, is that 97.1 or does it sound better at 97.3? Like the fact that it's like channel 1, channel 2, like 90s on 9, 80s on 8. Anyway, some of you might be like, it's not a big deal to you, but to me, I was like, I can't imagine life without it. All right, and we end here with a bit of music and TV history. On this day in 1968, Will Smith is born and raised in West Philadelphia. We know what he did in West Philadelphia, Jill.
On the playground is where he spent most of his days.
There you go. And on this day in 1970, I Think I Love You, The Partridge Family premieres on ABC. You had a couple of these sort of hybrid reality show type shows coming out in the late 60s. You had, we've mentioned the Monkees, right? Like sort of a fake band that had hits. And then you sort of had the Partridge Family, a version of the Brady Bunch, but they sang and they had these hits. And so Partridge Family, I know, was a big show for boomers in their youth. It was the 90210, Jill, for the previous gen.
Our second 90210 reference this week.
Jill, it's your lucky week. I try to put stuff in I try to frame stuff in ways you can understand.
90210 is my barometer, basically.
And David Cassidy was the Brandon.
All right, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Review us in the App Store. And don't forget, give your daughters a little extra love.
It doesn't need to be on social media either. Do it in person. Do it on social media. Do it however you like. Carol Wagner, I'm looking at you.
All right. Bye, everybody.